Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As we've been reporting tonight, yesterday marked the first day in a 1 year that has opened for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to sue for damages and hold institutions and individuals accountable for abuse. That's regardless of whether the statute of limitations would have otherwise expired. This is all part of the Child Victims Act, a bill that Albany lawmakers passed this legislative session. It was signed into law by Governor Cuomo. Hundreds of lawsuits have already been filed, and advocates are encouraging more victims to come forward. Joining me now to talk about this is one of the legislators who supported the bill, Brooklyn Assembly member Rodneyse Bichotte. Also with us is Michael Polenberg, the Vice President of Government Affairs for the nonprofit organization Safe Horizon, which advocated for passage of this law. Thank you both for being here. This has been under discussion for a long, long time. And I imagine that in your time in the Assembly, this has got to be one of the most rewarding pieces of legislation that you've worked on.
Oh, definitely. I mean, coming into the legislature, I wasn't even expecting to have this bill come up. And no one knew that I, too, was a victim of child sex abuse. So when this was presented to me a few years ago, it was obviously very controversial. And they wanted to dilute the bill and so forth. And I was one of the legislators that said, no, I know how it feels to be molested. I know how it feels to be depressed. Mm-hmm. I know how it feels to be have post-traumatic anxiety. We need to protect our children out there. So this year, on February 14th, when this bill was passed and signed into law, this was probably the most important bill. Mm-hmm. I would probably have to will remember in my entire life.
At what point in the process did you decide to disclose that you were a survivor of this kind of abuse?
Well, when I noticed that this bill was going to pass and no one was going to speak up as a victim, I stood up and I talked about at 10 years old how I was abused by a pastor in my living room, and it went on for some time. And there was no therapy. There was no way for me to seek justice. And this was justice for everyone, for children out there, for adults who didn't have the opportunity. And when I did speak up, one by one, other legislators started speaking up. And so the power of speaking up was in the room.
Are you planning to sue?
I'm not planning to sue.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at an ad you cut. This is in Haitian Creole. Let's take a quick listen. You can tell us what you're telling people.
Là où t'es victime abus sexuel comme un petit moun. Ça son bagay qui k'ap prend un pile temps. Un pile temps pour k'ap changer qui sa qui t'est arrivé.
What are you saying there?
I'm telling the Haitian community that when you are a victim as a child, sometimes it takes time for you to tell someone or get over it. And in the Haitian community, especially during this xenophobic, very anti-immigrant, air with this administration, it's important that people in the immigrant community know their rights. Mm-hmm. And in Creole, I wanted to make sure I spread that. I represent the largest Haitian community in the state of New York. Okay. So that was important.
Now, Michael Polenberg, we talked with you, I don't know how many years ago, hoping that this bill would see the light of day. Right. Now that it has passed, what does Safe Horizon plan to do?
Sure. First of all, it's amazing. It's a new day in New York. Both when the bill was passed in late January, when the governor signed it into law in mid-February, and yesterday, or on the 14th, marked the beginning of the 1-year window. So, ultimately, the decision for survivors, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, everyone's going to process this differently. And for adults who now have this ability to pursue civil damages, it's up to them and it's up to each survivor to decide what's best for him or her. It's important to have a support network in place regardless of what a survivor plans to do. But if what we're trying to do is encourage survivors, encourage all New Yorkers to learn about the bill, to learn about the options that it might present, and have a survivor make an informed decision about how they want to move forward. And we're directing folks, for example, to our website. We've had over 5,000 unique hits at safehorizon.org/CVA for Child Victims Act. And we explained in plain English what the law does. There's very little legal jargon. What's the difference between a civil complaint and a criminal proceeding, how to find a good lawyer, things we think folks should know.
This is, in fact, very important that people should understand that this is not a way of alerting the police that you want somebody arrested or something like that, right? I mean, that may come out of it, but that's not primarily what this law covers.
Right. So the 1-year window is only for survivors who can seek, who want to file a civil lawsuit. There is no ability to retrospectively or retroactively file a criminal complaint. Right. But it does mean that survivors can hold somebody accountable in the courtroom. It means the door to the courtroom is open and they have the option about whether they want to walk in or not.
Now, for both of you, when this was under discussion, it wasn't fully debated, but it was strongly implied that this could be very expensive for certain institutions, for youth-serving institutions, for religious institutions that are currently led by and serving people who had nothing to do with the original abuse. What is the answer to that?
I mean, thousands and thousands of people's lives have been affected. Some have actually taken their own lives, and there's no value to that. So again, even though I'm not suing, this is an opportunity for people to choose whether they want to seek justice through the courts. These institutions should be held accountable. Okay, we have to make examples, and this bill, this movement, will stop the child.
And it's worth keeping in mind, right, that even if the money damages that are sought or eventually received are nominal or minimal or even non-existent, there's still a process by which you can get information that wouldn't otherwise be available.
Absolutely. There's a discovery process to learn about what individuals did and what institutions did. To echo what the Assembly member said, if an institution knowingly covered up child sex abuse, if they simply shuttled a known sex abuser from one site to another, if they never called the police or alerted a prosecutor, they ought to be held responsible, even if the abuse happened many years ago. And survivors have every right to hold not only individuals, but institutions accountable. The Assembly member mentioned that there were attempts to water down the bill or dilute the bill over the years. There were proposals, for example, to exempt institutions from liability. That was a non-starter for the advocates and for the legislature, too.
Definitely.
And so do you expect there to be a change looking forward? Once we get through this, it's almost akin to a truth and reconciliation process whereby people will sort of settle old painful questions that need justice and need clarification and need transparency. When that is over, do you expect that there'll be different policies, different personnel policies, different behavior at these institutions?
Oh, definitely. Again, the Child Victims Act will definitely serve a model that will institute a more safer environment for children, even with sex trafficking, across our borders. So definitely, I think there'll be a change. I think the change already had started. I think there are policies that are being rolled out in schools and private schools where teachers and administrators have to take classes and so forth, and they check off like, hey, we went through this whole process. So there's some measures that are already being taken.
And that in fact can be one of the outcomes of some of this legal action as well, right? A requirement or new policies and procedures to prevent this from happening.
Sure. Institutions that have been held accountable for abuse that happened under their watch, if they're smart, they're going to change their policies, they're going to change their practices and ensure that the settings that they operate are safer for children and safer for everybody.
Okay. Congratulations again to both of you. Thanks so much for coming in to tell us about this. We're going to take a short break here. When we come back, as the city deals with lead in public housing,